Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. So for today's letter, we have got Anne and Miles. And before we get into this, Anne requested that Amy join me for this letter reading, which is a bit on the lengthier side, but we've negotiated this. And also for those of you who are wondering, even though we offer readings between 500 to 2,000 words, if you do have a letter that is too hard to cut down 2,000 words, you just let me know and I will ask to be paid a bit more for it. But otherwise, without further ado, Amy, would you like to reintroduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, hi everyone. So nice to be back. And I don't know how Anne knew this, but I actually love a long letter. So very excited to read this one.
Well, without further ado, let's get straight into Anne's letter. Miles and I were friends in undergrad. We lost touch, then reconnected 10 years later, living in separate states. We talked multiple nights a week for hours. I loved talking to him, but eventually felt I was spending too much time talking to someone who hadn't mentioned moving forward. One night, Miles said he dated several perfectly good women, but could never bring himself to take the next step, even when it made sense. He'd also said his father died suddenly when he was 9, so I figured he had a fear of losing loved ones. Oh, yeah. I'm already going to just say it. I'm getting FA vibes now. Like this is not seeming like DA vibes based on this early presentation. I saw this as a red flag given I tended to date emotionally unavailable men. I blocked him to avoid the he'll be different for me trap. Okay, let's just pause at this first paragraph. We've already got so much in such a short amount of time. And you're quite self-aware. But I'm gonna take a breath. Amy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's so funny. I was having the same thoughts as you were reading this. I'm definitely, I know it's early, but I'm definitely getting some FA vibes too. And I think I might be getting a little slight FA undertones from Anne, which is totally fine. Of course, I have a soft spot for FAs because I too was an FA. But the blocking him to avoid the he'll be different for me trap, very smart. But also like that could be a little bit of FA, a little bit of, secure sort of mixed behavior. Hey, maybe it's even just very secure. You really value your time. Of course, we know that a parent dying suddenly in childhood is going to affect, our attachment wounding and our relationships almost without doubt. So, yeah, definitely feeling some stuff moving already.
Completely agreed with everything you said. So, Anne continues. Miles reached out 2 years later. Knowing little about attachment styles, I figured enough time had passed that he knew what he wanted. We called and talked about life updates. We immediately jumped back into talking often, like no time had passed. He was looking at flights to see me or fly to him. Wait a second. Sorry, I just thought of something. If you'd blocked him, but then he reached out 2 years later, something suggests to me, based on this letter, that he didn't actually address the blocking. So this is just sort of like questions I'm now raising, and obviously we don't have answers just yet. But my question is, didn't he know that he was blocked? And secondly, if he didn't, did you unblock him during this particular time? Because to me, I would have assumed that he would have at least brought that up. So just wanted to point that out there. What are your thoughts on that, Amy?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I mean, I'm thinking maybe, Anne, you unblocked him sometime in the 2 years because you figured there's no point in having him blocked, and I'm kind of already past this. Um, but if he's, FA, maybe leaning DA, which I have a feeling it might be going in that direction, then I kind of understand why he wouldn't bring it up because that attachment style sort of wants to just glaze over those sorts of uncomfortable details sometimes. But definitely notable.
I think what really bothers me about that is it feels like an elephant has just gone unaddressed in the room between the two of you. It's sort of just like sitting there, and it's like, and I'm curious if that sort of lack of acknowledgement of significant issues is a theme that we'll see in this letter reading, but let's continue. After some hiccups, he planned to see me about 2 months in. I was excited because undergrad was the last we saw of each other. However, hours before his flight was to arrive, he texted that it was pouring rain and he had a bad feeling and he apologized that he wasn't able to come. I was crushed. When I called to talk about what happened, he said he had a feeling something bad was going to happen. I suggested we give each other space to think about what we wanted with each other, and we agreed to end the year in no contact about 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I got nosy and found his Facebook, and I saw a picture of him and an adorable baby girl smiling from ear to ear with a caption, "It's the love of my life's first birthday." After more snooping, I discovered that this was a picture of him with his daughter, whom he never once mentioned in the 3 months since reconnecting. I was dumbfounded. Well, I guess that prediction, aged very well. Okay. I know we're stopping a lot, but well, I'm catching my breath. Amy, do you want to just share thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how shocked you were, Anne, because I mean, I'm sure this was the last thing you were thinking you were going to find when you were Facebook snooping. Which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. You're just trying to see what's going on, and you found some big news out. Um, I would definitely say that this is a flag of sorts. Um, if he didn't bring this up to you, and I know we're getting there, but this is obviously a very big deal, and some major context is going to be required around this new discovery.
Yes. You said flag. I'm going to say flags because we're running a carnival at this stage. And this is giving me some very scary vibes. Like, it's like, bro, how did you not bring this up? Like, this is kind of serious. Again, the elephant remains unaddressed. When the 2 weeks ended, I FaceTimed him. He looked elated to see me. I immediately asked, "How come you didn't tell me you're the father of a beautiful little girl?" His face instantly went cold. His voice went flat. Freeze response. He sounded like a robot. He claimed he did tell me in that first conversation where we discussed life updates. Gaslighting. I wanted to believe him, so I kept trying to make sense of it while he was growing more annoyed. Finally, he said, "If you're going to stop talking to me, go ahead. I don't care." Shocked and hurt, I got off the phone. He was apologetic via text and asked if I thought we could work things out. He explained that he had a friend with benefits and was about to cut things off when she got pregnant. According to him, she kept the pregnancy hoping that they would be together. When he still wasn't interested, she used the child to be spiteful, making it hard for him to see his daughter. He didn't tell me because it was a rocky situation he didn't like talking about. Since he wasn't a deadbeat, I overlooked it. I was more hurt over him saying he didn't care. When I mentioned this, he said he'd always been able to cut people off quickly without caring. Oh. I asked if he ever thought about therapy because that didn't seem healthy, especially since I wasn't in the wrong here. He said he'd consider therapy. He was distant for weeks. I thought things were over and started dating someone else. Then one day he texted, I'm going to be in your city tomorrow. If you want to hang out, that's fine. If not, that's fine too. Just need a getaway. I decided to see him, and our connection was effortless over the 4 days he was here. It was like there hadn't been any distance at all. When he got back and he said he was glad he came, he felt we had a great in-person connection, and if he found a promising job here, he'd consider moving. But he soon started flaw finding or had a new reason we should stop dating every other week. My social media usage, even though I rarely posted, my dating history, even though I cut someone off to be serious with Miles, he does had a lot going on, etc. All right, I'm going to read one more paragraph and then we'll pause. During a good week, we planned for me to visit him. He agreed I could stay with him. A few days out, he texted that he thought it best for us that I got a hotel and we wouldn't be going to his house. He didn't say why. I only agreed to go because he paid for the hotel. I assumed this would be the last we'd see each other. We had great fun together, and to my surprise, he stayed with me at the hotel the entire time except to run a 1 hour errand one morning. On the last day, I brought up not seeing his place, and he blew up saying he put me in a nice hotel, hadn't seen his daughter in 4 days to be with me, and all I cared about was not seeing his place. Then, more to himself than me, God damn, nothing I do will ever be good enough. Projection. I was stunned because because I never thought or said such a thing. I thought for sure things were over between us, but a few days later, he was back talking to me almost every day and asked about visiting me. Okay, and I'm going to echo what Amy said. This is not reading like a letter written by someone with an anxious attachment style. This is reading to me like a letter with a fearful avoidant attachment style because there is so much preoccupation with the about like I'm thinking this is about to end, whereas anxious attachers don't usually have that kind of pronounced fear of abandonment. It's similar, but it's not the same. Fear of loss is traditionally something we see in FAs, in my experience, whereas anxious attachers almost suppress that there's a fear of rejection or coming up. It's almost like they don't even want to acknowledge that happening at all. And they kind of like busy themselves and try and not address the elephant in the room. That's what I'm getting from this. But I'm not saying that to you as condemnation or criticism. It's more just to say, I can sort of see where your mind's going, and it's not consistent with someone who's been writing to us with an anxious attachment style. But it also could suggest you're also on the secure side of FA too. So just want to put that out there as well. You are in a very hot and cold environment with Miles. Let's talk about the man of the hour. Amy, what are your thoughts on Miles?
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, first, I totally agree with what you just said, Ken. Yeah, definitely sounds like this is not coming from a hyper anxious place at all. And you can tell that, like Ken said, you're sort of bracing yourself for loss, which is understandable because, again, Miles is very hot and cold and he's sort of unpredictable. And I'm sensing kind of an undertone that, like, you are somewhat comfortable in the chaos. Now, I don't mean that again as condemnation, like, oh, you are comfortable in the chaos, you're not seeing this. I mean that as unfortunately, those of us with fearful avoidant attachment, we are usually comfortable in some sort of chaos and we can like more easily make sense of it because we are used to having survived some sort of chaos for a prolonged period of time. So, my heart goes out to you if this is correct. But wow, this is, you know, we went from one elephant in the room to a whole family of elephants because Miles is, um, he's very hot and cold. He he sure does seem to be combative, but then at the same time ignore the conflicts and in lieu of repairing, he kind of just glazes over it, which is so interesting. And I really do think I'm curious to see if you agree, Ken. It seems like Miles is a very like DA leaning FA. Like he definitely seems to chase Anne when he feels like she's pulling away, but then he seems hyper sensitive to criticism. He's very in with the last minute plans, which is another very dismissive avoidant trait. Last minute plans are so much more comfortable because they don't really require planning and commitment. But he also has this spiciness of him that is more common of FAs than DAs. What do you think, Ken?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's so much to like this presentation that I mean, I could start pulling the guy apart from a mile away. Let's start with his projection. God damn, nothing I do will ever be good enough. That to me is big mother wound sort of language, because to me, it makes me think he's had a history of trying to appease and please people. And and I also think this also extends to his friends with benefits situation. Like to me, I'm like, why the fuck is he still hanging around with this person? Like, why is he, to me, there's no boundaries here. You know, it suggests to me that he's got big mother wounds where I wouldn't be surprised if his mum has had a lot of trauma. And I think it's interesting that he seems to connect with women like this friends with benefits situation where I wouldn't be surprised if he probably feels guilty and he feels the need to still, interact with her. And I got to tell you, those kind of relationships are very codependent. If you have anything defined by guilt, shame, and fear, usually that's where we get into trauma bond land. So to me, I'm like, there's some glaring red flags here with Miles and his projection, amongst other things, and his lack of boundaries with other people as well too. I agree with what you said about the spontaneous "let's meet in your city" thing. Um, I also want to address the freeze. It's interesting how when you addressed the situation with his daughter, that obviously set him off very quickly. This guy has not got a lot of emotional resilience. For him to go from connecting with you, keen to connect with you, straight into freeze like that suggests to me that you hit him in a spot which he was not comfortable with. He was caught with his pants on fire, and it's interesting how he really tried to push you away psychologically, saying things like, if you're going to stop talking to me, go ahead, I don't care. Like, and again, to what you were saying, Amy, that's a very sort of dismissive strategy of just being like, if we were to break up, I wouldn't care, albeit with a bit more ferocity. Like I really feel there's a bit more fight energy to this, not just numbing. So yeah, this guy is giving me big dismissive leaning FA sort of stuff. I'm also going to throw in there and say if he has other flavors of things going on in the picture as well too, I personally wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of intensity, a lot of going back and forth in short periods of time. Again, it's like he's shoving you away instead of sort of doing more of the slow fade. And he's communicating all of these flaw findings, which again, flaw finding is an avoidant trait, and both fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance engage in it. But he seems to be more communicative around it, which suggests to me just more FA. And obviously, there's a lot of instability here. He seems all over the place, which if you zoom out and put into perspective that he had a child, sort of a surprise, a surprise child, with somebody who he wasn't in a relationship with, not judging that situation whatsoever. I'm just trying to look at it through the lens of what might be adding to his emotional instability and his stress. And again, not making excuses. We're just trying to really paint a full picture and see what might be going on. But his stress is definitely oozing out everywhere. It's also sad, and I suspect we'll see more of this as we read on. There does seem to be feelings here. Like I don't doubt that he really did want to see you and he wanted to hang out with you. But when the pressure's on, there's dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance are so good at connecting. Like they are so good at connecting. They can be amazing in person, but it's like the thing that comes next, the expectation of what's next, that really like can spark up the fears, and then you see this sort of dysregulated behavior. So I can imagine it was very stressful for you, Anne, and confusing.
Yeah, I have to agree. I have to agree. I think this is very destabilizing because you've gone from surprise baby to spontaneous hotel getaway to projection city. Nothing I will ever do will be good enough. Like Jesus, like what's next? And we're only at page 2, so let the trauma town continue. Um, Anne writes, I have abandonment issues and a deep I am unworthy core wound from my father, who had two children from a previous marriage. He was an active father to them, but chose not to be in my life from birth. Ooh. The hot and cold with Miles triggered my abandonment fears, and I told him if he suddenly chose someone else, I would feel like it was my father choosing his other children over me all over again. He looked horrified and said, That's not on me. After that conversation, Jesus Christ. After that conversation, he ghosted me for 6 weeks. During this time, I started learning about attachment styles. Oh, Jesus. When he came back, I insisted on talking about why he ghosted. Good on you. He had started and really liked therapy, recognized ghosting was a poor reflection on him, saw his friends building lives with partners, and realized keeping people at a distance was preventing him from having the life he wanted. This sounded promising, so I let him back in. The next 2 months were delightful. We talked consistently and our connection grew. He planned a 5-day beach resort vacation. On the vacation, we became increasingly intimate in new ways, both sexually and emotionally. I asked if he told his mum where he was, and he said no because she would have wanted to come, which I thought, there we go. There's the emotional incest right there. Right there, I told you. Not saying that to you, Amy. Um, he said he told two friends we both knew from undergrad. Somehow we got on the subject of my father, and he encouraged me to reach out for answers. I asked if he would be there for the conversation, and he agreed. So I called my father while on the trip and had my first, likely only conversation with him about why he wasn't in my life. Basically, he made no effort and gave lame excuses about having a lot going on. Through it all, Miles was beyond supportive. He helped prepare questions to ask, listen to the call, and talk through my feelings about my father's responses. It was an incredibly vulnerable experience, so much so that I became anxious about the lack of a title, fearing this could end at any moment and he'd choose someone else. I asked for clarity on our relationship status, and the trip went downhill. He claimed he had family stuff going on, had trust issues, and didn't want to bring anyone around his daughter until she turned 3. Jesus. I mentioned having a hard time not to internalize this as something wrong with me. He looked pained, like he wanted to weep, which surprised me because showing intense sadness wasn't his norm. He said he should leave women alone because he's bad at dating and he can't give women what they want and is tired of hurting them. Well, he should have thought about that before getting involved with you, Anne. The next morning, I wanted to say one more thing about the situation, and he asked me to drop it. I insisted on getting it out. When I finished, he was enraged, telling me that I ruined our last day there and I should have just shut the fuck up. Whoa. No one had ever talked to me like that, and I went into a fawn response, later apologizing if I ruined things. Fair enough. I believed he felt bad because he insisted I didn't ruin anything and later said things like, Thanks for making our last day fun. To this day, he's never spoken to me that way again. The two friends he said he told about this trip FaceTimed him. They were asking questions about where he was, which indicated he hadn't told them. I asked to say hi, seeing as they knew me, and he said no and went back to talking to them. When he saw my demeanor change and I was upset, he told them, oh, someone wants to say hi, and shoved the camera in my face. His friends greeted me by my name. I was so confused about why he lied about telling them, but figured we were done, so it didn't matter. Right before I left for my flight, he said, I have to come to your city next. This left me even more confused because he had just said he couldn't do a relationship right then. I need to take a breath. Amy, can you please share your thoughts and feelings on this?
Oh my goodness. I mean, wow. This back and forth is this is a lot. This is even a lot more than we usually read in our letters. And usually we have very intense situations sent to us. And first, I just want to go back and say it's so vulnerable and brave of you to share that you have a deep I am unworthy core wound from your father. That makes so much sense. You make so much sense. Anyone, I think, in your position with a father who had two children from a previous marriage who was active with them and sort of not with you, I don't see how somebody could come out of that without an unworthy core wound and a deep fear of abandonment. So I'm so sorry that you went through that because that is such a painful experience. And also, good on you for bringing that up and for sharing that and saying, hey, listen, this is my history and this is what I'm scared of. And this stuff is coming up for me. That's actually very secure. And that's really beautiful, straightforward communication. And I love that you were able to do that. Um, I love also, like Ken said, good on you for bringing up why he ghosted, because I'm sure if you hadn't brought it up, you would have just glazed right on over that. Now, it's interesting here that he went to therapy and he, was picking it apart. This to me is a very FA side. It's very common for fearful avoidance to engage in therapy and to really enjoy it and sort of like almost become obsessive with it sometimes. Now, the question is, will these things stick? I have a feeling they won't with him. I will say, I don't feel great, and I'm wondering how you felt about this. I don't feel great about the situation where on vacation he sort of pushed you to reach out to your father, who you might not have spoken to in a very long time, to have this conversation in his presence. I do see how you felt supported by it in the moment. But I just feel like he was overstepping, and it's and it again, it's giving that like fearful avoidant thing where sometimes we swing far over to one side of the pendulum and it's like too much too soon. And I don't know. It's just, I don't think that it was his place. And it makes me nervous for you because you shared in such a vulnerable experience with him, and he hasn't really shown to be a reliable emotional support system yet. So this just makes me anxious, and I'm sure, we'll figure out why. But again, that was a very brave and beautiful thing that you did to walk toward your healing. So good on you. I'll just say a few more things and throw it to Ken because there's just so much here. Um, Definitely red flag that he didn't want to tell his mom about the vacation because she would want to come. I mean, you know, that's not always a red flag, but in this context, with everything we know, definitely some stuff going on, which I'm sure Ken will explain in better detail. Of course, when you mentioned so of course you felt vulnerable after sharing about your dad, which anybody would. And I completely understand why you were like, hey, listen, we just had this super duper vulnerable thing. And I need to know kind of where we're at because there's been so much back and forth. And like, we really wanted to find the relationship. For him to respond this way is absolutely not okay. Like you said, and I'm glad you said that nobody has ever spoken to you like that before because nobody should have to be spoken to like that. That's terrible. Um, and again, he's just showing a lot of signs of instability. And like when I zoom out and look at his behavior, he seems like a frantic, wounded child who's like overwhelmed, who doesn't know which way to go, who's like fine if everybody's going along with him, but the second somebody asks him something that he doesn't like, he freaks out. It seems like he is probably at his capacity for stress and for like any sort of friction. But again, when we're adults in relationships, we can't handle ourselves like this. So it's really not okay. And then the thing with the friends, that's also really hurtful. And especially if you knew these people and you were all in undergrad together. And again, that could also be attributed to a dismissive avoidant trait where they're just kind of more private and secretive, not necessarily for a malicious or manipulative reason, but just because they have such a deep fear of being judged that they sort of keep silly things private. But I don't know if that really extends as an excuse for this situation because I just think it's kind of rude. Okay, what do you think, Ken? While I take a breath.
I loved everything you said. I'm going to start from where you just finished. I find it really interesting that on one hand, he demonstrated, as you said, those dismissive tendencies to keep everything private, not show the friends, like try and, basically maintain that distance of intimacy with his private life and, between you. But then, you know, when he saw your face, he obviously had a fear of loss moment and just immediately was changed his tune and was like, oh, no, no, wait, someone here wants to speak to you. Interesting depersonalized language. It's interesting that he didn't refer to your name based on the letter, but I won't go too much into that. I just find that, again, speaks to his instability of flip-flopping between fear of abandonment, fear of intimacy. Not in that order in this case. I think going to this entire vacation, I mean, I could pull this entire thing apart because it says so much. I actually just want to stop here and say, and I'm so sorry that you've been through this. Like, seriously, this is just not okay. I know you've known this guy for a while, and your hunches were, I think, 100% on the money with this guy all along. And listen, it doesn't mean to say that Miles is, necessarily a bad guy by any means. Like, you obviously didn't fall in love with him because of all these things that were happening to you across the course of the relationship. Like, obviously, there's been a connection here, right? But I also want to say the way he's behaved, from his wounding is not okay. And I'm going to say it is abusive because we know he's had a history of doing this. He knows he's tired of hurting women, yet he's still hurting women, namely you. So it's like, okay, well, bro, you can go to therapy as much as you want, but if you're not choosing to actively work on this and actually recognize how you're, still hurting a lot of people, and taking direct intervention, you're an abuser. And I think this is, what's really sad is I think Miles is going to be the kind of guy who's probably going to, I reckon it'll probably take him a few more relationships and loss before eventually he collapses and is just like, I can't do this anymore. And he has to face the mirror and really come to terms with what he's doing. But the sad thing is that at this rate, I don't think change is happening immediately because it really seems like he's just in the thick of his wounding right now as well. As for what you were saying before, Amy, about how he he said no to his mum being there. The reason I reacted like that to anyone who hasn't heard me talk about this before is because it makes me think she's obviously a very emotionally incestuous or a very enmeshed mum. The reason I'm bringing this up is because there are usually telltale signs in these letters that someone has had a history of emotional incest or enmeshment that I can pick up on. And I'm like, oh, there it is. And earlier, I can't remember off the top of my head what it was that I picked up on, but I think it was the whole thing with his daughter and having no boundaries around that. I find that when, in this case, a straight man has had an overbearing mum, not only can it influence the attachment style, but it can absolutely engender misogyny and also a need to control the intimacy between them and their primary caregiver. And they can hold on to so much rage and resentment over having lost their autonomy and vulnerability to a parent who's parentified them, essentially. So that's the reason why there's a few telltale signs of stuff going on here where it sounds like, as the book No More Mr. Nice Guy would say, he's probably monogamous with his mum, amongst other things. Anyways, that's my 2 cents on all of this thus far. I guess the last thing I'll say too is I'm sorry that he also just told you to shut the fuck up because that's just disgusting behavior. And also wild how in one breath he's telling you, you've ruined our last day here, but then finishes by saying, you haven't, and he's getting teary-eyed about it. Again, you're really seeing a flip-flop of fear of intimacy, fear of abandonment, and man, I actually do think this guy has got more than attachment stuff going on. Like, to me, this guy's got raging emotional dysregulation.
Yes, for sure. It's just and also I agree with everything you just said, especially about the parentification and how that can manifest. And I feel like it's very common, or at least mildly common, that when there's an only child situation and a father passes and there's an only child who's a son, that son kind of can be parentified. And sometimes what happens is not in a sexually abusive way, but sometimes when with an only child or an eldest child, when there's a divorce or when one parent leaves, that child becomes like the stand-in for that spouse. So, for example, if there's an eldest daughter and the parents divorce and the dad leaves, that mom can kind of treat the eldest daughter like her ex-husband and sort of filter those emotions for the husband toward the daughter and expect the daughter to do things like maybe bring in some extra money or take care of the siblings. And so if you paste that onto this dynamic with Miles and his mom, that could very well have happened here. And also, you know, that when you're parentified as a child and a teenager and a young adult, you feel very smothered in romantic relationships, and it really sort of ups your chances of feeling engulfed, even when somebody is not engulfing you. Like even if somebody is not pressuring you or not being too much, just the mere insinuation of a relationship, of a commitment, of expectations, of just a normal relationship are enough to send someone like into panic, and make them start flaw finding or fighting or being very emotionally reactive, like we see here with Miles. So, um, you know, it's definitely, I agree with Ken. Like I feel like there's a little bit more going on than just DA leaning FA. And then also, just one last thing I want to throw in is that Ken and I have actually been seeing a lot of these sentences in these letters that say something like, he said, I should just leave women alone. He said, I'm bad at relationships. I just shouldn't do this. And I know, personally, I used to be of the mind that like if I were dating someone and they said that when I was very FA, like that wouldn't be a red flag to me. I'd be like, oh my God, you're gonna choose me and I'm gonna be the one that is gonna, break your bad boyfriend spell because you're gonna love me so much and this is gonna be amazing. And when you have a fearful avoidant style, like this is not a red flag at all. But now zoomed out, we can see when somebody tells you that they're bad at relationships, just believe them. Just believe them. When somebody tells you, that they should leave women alone, and this is not, I'm not even speaking specifically to you. I'm speaking to our listeners. We are not at all criticizing anything that you did here. And we understand why this didn't make you run because you were already in so deep, and he was telling you that he was going to therapy. But this is the thing, when we have insecure attachment, instead of viewing the person that we're dating's insecure attachment behaviors peeking through, it's almost like we are more attracted to them. And of course, I think that that's laced into like, oh, this kind of sparks something from childhood that I might have a chance to resolve, to close. And if I could just get this need met or change the situation with this person, then that will sort of, solve the wound. Also, this could be, you so vulnerably and beautifully shared before that you had an unworthy core wound. And so when we have that deep belief that we are unworthy, even if consciously we think, you know what, actually, I want a good and healthy relationship, when people treat us like this, the reason why we don't run for the hills is because deep inside we feel, oh, like this is what's meant for me. This is what I'm cut out for. This is what I'm supposed to get. And it's heartbreaking because you are worthy, Anne. Like I can tell you that categorically because human beings are worthy of love. Like there's nothing that you can do that can make you unworthy. We can be wounded and healed in different versions of healthy within a relationship, but I'm just, very sorry that you have this wound, and that you were in this position where you felt like, this person is behaving in a way that I should stick around for because, this is, maybe what I'm supposed to be getting. Um, yeah, I'm sorry for that.
I completely agree. So, continuing Anne's letter, she writes, the next months were miserable. I started applying what I had been learning about attachment styles. And on that note, just to echo something with what Amy was saying, you're doing a great job with what you knew at the time because even basic attachment theory, whilst practical, may not be able to give you the full scope of what's going on with Miles, but you're doing a fabulous job just, surviving this experience and trying to make it work with him. In any case, you started applying and learning attachment. I started applying what I'd been learning about attachment styles. including healthy ways to communicate needs and boundaries without self-abandoning. Very good. It seemed the more I tried to set an example for safe communication of feelings, needs, and boundaries, the meaner and more distant he became. And here are some of the things that happened during that time. I wanted to take a moment here before I read some of these examples out. That is the way it usually goes. When, in my experience, if I'm ever going to tell someone to practice secure behavior, I always have a huge asterisk on that, being that if you're going to do this, no, it doesn't mean this is going to get better. It's just going to reveal the direction where things are going to go for you in this relationship. And that's where you really have to have radical acceptance over the situation, for better or for worse. Anyways, things that happened. Following the vacation, I saw clarity. He put off the conversation at least 3 times with different excuses. Finally, I said, I'm trying to be considerate of the things you have going on right now, but I'm starting to feel like I'm being ignored or strung along. Good on you. He replied, not ignoring you or stringing you along. But the next morning, I woke up to a text saying, actually, you're right. I am stringing you along. Oh, great. With absolutely no explanation. And he ended up blaming me for making him say that. We'll come back to that point, but that's a great example of intentional avoidant abuse, meaning he absolutely does know what he's doing. And this is not a case of him having unconscious behavior. That is bloody conscious from the sounds of it. He wanted to visit one weekend. I told him I had a friend who was a guy's birthday. Sorry, I told him I had a friend who was a guy, that it was their birthday party, and Miles invited himself. I said he could hang out at my place, or I would take him anywhere he wanted to go while I attended the party for an hour or so. But since we weren't in a committed relationship, I wasn't comfortable with him inviting himself to things in my life or introducing him to even more people who were important to me. Yeah, I completely agree. Honestly, I wanted to avoid having to explain his hot and cold behavior to anyone outside of my close circle when he disappeared again. He broke things off via text. When all I said back was okay, he called hours later acting like he didn't mean it, but he was still mad because he refused to talk to me the entire weekend of the party, claiming my friend had me for that weekend. It was like he was punishing me. He called that Monday and sheepishly mumbled, "Did you fuck him?" I asked what he said, but he was too ashamed to repeat it. Fuck me. Not literally, but just, Jesus Christ. He lost one of his full-time remote jobs and took it hard, somehow using that as a catalyst to question why he was dating. Oh yeah. Just for those of you who are listening, that's something that Mike even brought up last time we were on the podcast, where he was saying how we got to remember that circumstantially, if an avoidant attacher who's, not doing too well circumstantially may find reasons to break up with a partner because they're not feeling too good. Anyways, we hardly talked for 3 weeks. He didn't even bother wishing me safe travels before I left for a birthday trip from the US to Southeast Asia. My final day of the trip, he texted that his daughter's mum chose to move with his daughter closer to her family. He was moving so he could stay close to his daughter, found a big home in the new state, and wanted me to live with them. We were still not in a relationship. He rescinded the offer before I could decline. When I got back stateside, I pointed out that I tried to honor his need for space, and in return, I needed him to learn about my needs. Like a petulant toddler, he said, I don't want to learn about your needs. I said, that's fine, but maybe that means we're not compatible. But take some time to think about it. Yeah, good on you, Anne. More weeks passed of us hardly talking. Jesus Christ. Yeah, he's definitely punishing you. Um, we got 2 more. Yeah. I told him my mum and I would be in his city for Thanksgiving, but made it clear we weren't looking for an invite to dinner. He must have not believed me because a couple of days later he texted, my mum said you're all welcome to come for dinner. I reminded him that we weren't looking for an invite and politely declined. Good on you. He replied, this is getting ridiculous and I think we should stop talking. I wish you the best. He announced he blocked me, probably to hurt my feelings. He was back in 3 weeks. Jesus. Finally, he finally agreed to conversations around needs, boundaries, triggers, etc. But he didn't end up showing up, claiming it was a tough time for him. I tried using nonviolent communication to explain how I felt, but he still became extremely defensive, claiming what I was saying was bullshit and hanging up in my face. I immediately blocked him. Good on you. I'm going to take a moment to just recover from this insanity. I'm going to say it now. I reckon this guy's got BPD. Like, honestly, this is not standard FA sort of behavior. And Amy, you're the expert.
Yeah, no, I I do not think that this is standard FA behavior, and it is certainly not standard DA behavior. And while I'm not qualified to diagnose anything or BPD, I would suspect, just based on my knowledge and from the zoomed out perspective, that I feel very confident saying this is well above and beyond both FA and DA behavior. Could it be severe FA behavior? Perhaps. But a lot of times people with severe FA behavior might also have something else, because we have to remember that fearful avoidance usually do come from a pretty intense history of trauma. And you could assume that the more deeply fearful avoidant you are, the more trauma you might have experienced. But this, I mean, he invited you to live with him and then literally rescinded before you could decline. Like, that's just a little snippet. This is just so representative of the speed in which he's flip-flopping. That is just very indicative of, I think, some serious emotional instability. Um, and also, like Ken was saying, good on you for all of these boundaries, for you not jumping. See, the reason why I suspect, Anne, that you might have a mixture of like maybe some FA, but a good amount of secure, is because I think if this were someone very anxious writing this letter, you can see that you're doing such a beautiful job all along of stating your needs, of making requests, of upholding your boundaries. And unfortunately, when we have very anxious attachment, we're actually kind of very avoidant to this sort of stuff. We don't really say how we're feeling in the moment, and we're too scared to sort of piss the person off. And because they might leave. And so we kind of hold it in until it bubbles over, and then we can't take it anymore. And then maybe we'll explode, but probably not. Maybe it'll just come out in little passive aggressive ways. So I really love how you were sort of sticking up for yourself. Um, but again, he is just throwing bouquets of red flags at us. I mean, um, it's just it's I'm trying to pick out something more specific. Um, I mean, all of it. He's changing his mind so much that it does read as something more serious, because, and it could be his life situation. It could be his life situation. He could have had a lot that he wasn't telling you going on, but it's kind of just shocking. Also, what Ken was saying, it's very true that when you have more avoidant attachment, um, if you don't have a job, or if your other sort of basic survival needs are at risk, that your relationships sort of become more expendable and not as important. But he keeps reaching for you, and that's the difference. It's not that he's consistently pulling back and like ghosting you and staying gone for a long time. He keeps coming back. He keeps pushing you away really, really hard and then sort of pulling you back in. And that is just, much more volatile behavior than we usually see, from a more mildly avoidant attachment. What do you think, Ken?
I completely agree. I want to go back to something you just said before, which is the speed of his decision making changing. Like, okay, when someone with a fearful avoidant attachment style is dysregulated, we would expect to see, some degrees of flip-flopping, within reason. And I mean, if you want more of like a reasonable account of that, feel free to listen to the podcast Amy, Mike, and I did, where, there is conversations around that. But one thing that was missing in what Amy and Mike were talking about in that podcast episode with this is volatility. This is like, he's really ratcheted it up a notch, where I can tell he's obviously dealing with a lot of shame about, what's going on, because he can tell he's hurting people. But there's such a volatility to this, that there's the intensity, the splitting, inviting himself to things which he's not actually a part of. He still hasn't committed to you in this relationship yet he wants to have all the treatment of a relationship. Like, this is going above and beyond just someone who has even a severe fearful avoidant attachment style. And I think this man needs a lot of hand holding. And I suspect the trauma he's gone through is severe for him to be like this because, there's so much stuff. He's got job issues. He's got a daughter who he's not connecting with properly. He's got an overbearing mum. He wants you and then he doesn't want you. This whole thing of like, this is getting ridiculous. And I think we should stop talking. I wish you the best. That is like loud, anxious attacher sort of protest behavior and very controlling of the narrative, controlling of the intimacy sort of stuff. Like it's really very almost violent the way in which he's behaving with the connection. Normally, if an FA, a fearful avoidant, was on the receiving end of, secure behavior and they weren't ready to, let's just say, level up, for want of a better phrase, they're probably not going to throw as much of a hissy fit over some of that communication. I could be wrong, but this just seems like, him saying things like, I don't want to learn about needs, really, I think speaks to his emotional age.
Yes, yes. And I think, somewhere in this, you said, like a petulant toddler, he said, I don't want to learn about needs. And there you can hear it. And, when adults in relationships or in romantic dynamics are fighting in this way, it really is like two wounded inner children fighting with their parents. And that breaks my heart because what I can imagine you might have been feeling at this time, Anne, is, you know, you were like you said, you were learning about nonviolent communication, which is beautiful. And truly, if you have someone who's more avoidant and you're communicating with them through nonviolent communication, and they are like decently stable and like really want to have a healthy relationship, that can be such a beautiful thing and like really help the relationship along. But it breaks my heart that you were in this dynamic for so long and that you really did keep trying things instead of leaving. And again, this is not a criticism whatsoever. This is me connecting with you and telling you that I see and hear you and I understand why you stayed and why you kept trying. Because there's like this deep call when we have attachment wounding and we're in a relationship with someone who keeps hurting us and who's like there for 1 minute but then leaves the next. Not only does that quite literally like set the foundation for our brain to think that we're having an addiction to this person, this intermittent reinforcement, especially when it's like very high highs and low lows, we quite literally feel like we're addicted to this person. But it's almost like the longer you stay in a dynamic like this, the higher the stakes are for you because you feel like this person is so valuable just because you have fought so hard to make this work. And we value that which we work really hard for. But then if you look underneath and say, okay, but wait a minute, why was I working so hard for this? Maybe you can see now that there might have been more of an attachment issue sponsoring, you trying to work this out with him versus him being like such a great fit and just like a really good potential partner. And I hope that, I know that this has definitely been a painful experience for you, but I also hope, and we'll talk more about this at the end, that this has been a healing experience for you and a space where you could maybe hopefully have met yourself at a place that really needed nourishment. Because, this is just so painful and this back and forth and hot and cold, it just really feels traumatic. It really, really feels extremely dysregulating and traumatic when you're in it.
Yep. And I'm also going to say it, like this is starting to get into discard sort of territory too. It's sort of like rinse and repeat, use and abuse sort of stuff too. But let's continue with what Anne says. So weeks later, to bypass the block, he called from a private number and left a voice message. He said he guessed I was really done with him, which sucked because he thought I'd be a great partner for him, but we couldn't seem to get our shit together. I just, by the way, audience can't see this, but I'm seeing Amy like shake her head back and forth to this entire thing. And I'm just like, and in my head, I'm like, I totally feel you, Amy, there in terms of like how you're feeling, because I agree. So, without unblocking him, I emailed saying if he truly thought we'd be great together, go to therapy with me. I think that's a great point. I understood if he didn't want to, but in that case, I wanted to move on. Fair enough. He agreed to go and even suggested we exchange a list of needs for a relationship. Oh, okay, so now he wants to talk about needs. He sent a beautifully detailed list of his needs, which was more extensive than he had ever previously communicated. I'm groaning at this because this is like the cop out one. One of them was patience. Okay, I'm going to take a little rant here. Anytime a severe avoidant asks for patience, my answer is no. You've had enough patience. You don't get any more patience from us. We're done with patience. Do you know how many of us have bent ourselves like beachside deck chairs for this shit? No, we're not doing that anymore. Amy, do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yes, it is extremely frustrating. I mean, on one hand, um, yes, of course, everybody wants patience, and you can definitely argue that an avoidantly attached person inherently needs more patience because they process more slowly. But you have been nothing but patient with this man thus far. I mean, you have truly had the patience of a saint, honestly, with him.
Mm-hmm.
So, I like the thing is at this point, it's going to be very hard for Ken and I to appreciate any good moves that he makes because we see what's happening and it's like he's already done so much damage that we are viewing this from a skeptical, critical lens, which, we should. But yeah, it's like patience. If somebody is coming to the table consistently and is like, hey, you know what? I really like you, and they're showing up with their actions and words, and they're like, also, can we slow down? Like, I kind of process things more slowly and I need patience. Totally fine. But if somebody has been whipping you around back and forth, up and down, changing their mind, hot and cold, I can only imagine how frustrating it must have been to read that as his number one need.
I completely agree with you. So to add to that, one of them was patience, as he learned that he processed emotional situations extremely slowly. Really, had no idea about that. He thought we could be perfect for each other, and therapy would help. Can I just say really quickly, that's real idealizing language, right? Like him saying we could be perfect together in spite of all the crap that's happened beforehand. That suggests to me he's projecting a lot of fantasy onto this, and he's not really taking a look at the reality of the situation. I quickly suggested a therapist wanting to get in before he deactivated again. Smart. We each sent the therapist our information so she could create our individual client portals. Before we scheduled the first session, he texted asking if I still wanted to do this since we hardly talked. This was intentional on my part as I didn't want to let him fully back in before starting therapy. I think that's fair enough. I said I still wanted to. He replied that he would like us to communicate more. I asked what his expectations were so we could be on the same page. He didn't respond, and I'm laughing at this now because it's a joke. Instead, ghosting me for 5 months. Far out. God, this guy's a joke. What a clown. He came back around my birthday, and initially I wanted nothing to do with him. Man, and I could feel the exhaustion from you just reading this. But I figured since he was orbiting and I no longer wanted a relationship, I could use the situation to my advantage. I go very long times between dating, liking someone enough to have sex. Prior to Miles, I hadn't had sex in 3 years. He mentioned he would be in town soon, so I agreed to see him. He spent the next day with me, and again, it was like no time had passed. It felt good to see him. The sex was better than ever, and we were both happy. I had no desire or intentions to talk about feelings or anything serious. He led the way this time. He asked, do you realize how much I like you? I said no, because he didn't express it often. He said he cared about me a lot, that he liked who he was with me and the things he told me he didn't share with anybody else. He claimed he almost said he loved me during sex, which I suspect was him testing the waters without saying it. I thought all that sounded great, but still wasn't thinking about anything beyond that moment. A couple days later, he said he really liked me and wanted to talk about next steps, insisting that he wanted to be in a relationship and marriage soon. I was shocked because he had never expressed so definitively that he was ready for a relationship with me, and I was very clear that I wasn't doing another long situationship. What we were doing needed to be clearly defined, and I would only consider a relationship with couples therapy. He ultimately agreed while saying he really liked me, but he was also concerned about getting overwhelmed trying to meet my expectations. This time, he showed up differently than ever before. We started talking every day. He was super thoughtful. For example, one night we talked about how often I made rice. Then a week later, while on the phone, he randomly went to Amazon and bought me a rice cooker. He was showing up to conversations I know in the past he would have stonewalled or deflected his way out of. There was no defensiveness. He was attentive. I was rapturous over the best version of him yet. Yeah, well, can I just make a moment here to say this sounds like what I call superficial change, not proper change. So this is very normal for when avoidant attachers who are severe and also look, severe anxious attachers will do this too. Narcissists will do this too. People with personalities will do this too. If they know what you want and they've got fear of abandonment and they want to reconnect, all this sort of stuff, they'll commit to for a little while, but it goes out the door when they actually need to, show that they've really changed. So I'm suspecting this is not real proper change. Anyways, the communication did slow. Well, here we go. The communication did slow down after several weeks, going from every day to 2 to 3 days a week. This stoked my anxiety a bit as I was prepared for him to slow fade, but he didn't. If I said I needed him, he showed up. But my spidey senses began tingling when he visited his mother after just seeing her the week prior to Thanksgiving. He drove 4 hours to see her, but hadn't seen me, a 6.5 hour drive or a 1.5 hour flight in more than 2 months. I decided I wouldn't visit him until he came to me first because that would let me know if long distance was going to be an excuse. Several times he looked at flights, but it was always last minute when they were expensive. He claimed, I'm a bad planner to justify not booking flights further out at reasonable prices. Between Thanksgiving and Christmas, a 1 month span, Miles saw his mum 3 to 4 times. This correlated with the slowdown in communication, as when he was with her, we talked less. There you go, monogamous with mum. I started getting weird vibes about their relationship, especially the more he describes her. Miles, who's an only child, became the man of the house when his father died, and he felt responsible for his mum, who never remarried. All I'm going to say is, like, when you know the signs, you know the signs. He said his mum played mind games with him his entire life and didn't want him going 6 hours away to school where we met. Didn't like any of his girlfriends, and most alarmingly, never took him to see his father's family after he passed. Miles reunited with his father's side this past Christmas and learned they were upset with his mum for not bringing him around. It seemed he was the man in his mum's life and she wanted to keep him to herself. Let's pause here because we've got probably one more page and then we're all wrapped up with Anne's letter, but emotional incest 101. Amy, what are your thoughts on all this craziness?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, yeah, oh God, it's a lot. Like I feel, this whole through this letter as it's going on, I feel this like heaviness in my chest. And that's like, it's almost like this, that is the feeling of this letter. It's almost like there is this love that just cannot for the life of it get off the ground. And it's like you are trying so hard, Anne, and truly despite his very unhealthy behavior, I really do think that Miles did or does love you and did have feelings for you this whole time because I don't see like why else he would keep going back to you. I don't really like think that people, sometimes people think like, oh, if they had an avoidant attachment and they ghosted, like they must not have liked me. I must not have been worth anything to them. Truly, I really don't like, I think it's rarely that. I think it is much more a fear thing. But what I'm really getting the heavy sense of with him is that he deeply feels like he does not deserve to be happy. He does not deserve a relationship. He does not deserve your love. And so I think he keeps trying to go back for it in bits and pieces. And like he's making an effort. He's going to therapy. He's buying you a rice cooker. Like he's being sweet. And it's almost like he is trying to, I feel like he is trying to convince himself that he can do this, that he can be in a healthy relationship, that he can sustain this love. But the problem is, when we don't actually believe that we deserve love or that we can hold it and handle it, we will absolutely sabotage it. Like we can't hold it. We don't have the capacity for it. And if we feel like we have something that we don't deserve, again, we will sabotage it. And I feel like, Anne, you are that thing that he feels like he doesn't deserve, but really deeply wants. And that kind of makes sense because if his pulling back is also correlating with the time that he's with his mom, I suspect that, with these sort of unhealthy relationship dynamics, I'm sure that or I would imagine that when Miles is back in the presence of his mom, he probably feels like that engulfed teenager again, like that, person who cannot escape. And his mom does seem to have, really cultivated a very unhealthy relationship with him from what we can tell, and sort of, isolating him from his dad's side of the family. And so, you know, it's a big deal. People in a lot of people, and I know Ken and I don't think like this because we're in the attachment space, but people who don't know about attachment don't understand how very much our childhood dynamics absolutely rule our lives, especially romantic relationships when we are adults. Like, this is the map to how we do love. This is the map to what we think is good and safe and possible and right and appropriate. And you can see that Miles is like all over the place. I mean, I'm just backing up in the letter because there's so much here. One moment he's saying, okay, yes, we'll do therapy, but I need us to communicate more. And then he proceeds to ghost you for 5 months. Like, it's very extreme behavior. And we know that this is not at all the first time he's done this. So what I'm seeing when I zoom out is somebody who's really, really struggling in life, and like kind of reaching for you, because there's this beautiful connection and you're obviously such a loving, beautiful person. And he just can't get it together, and he can't hold on to it, and he's not capable of like this healthy love that you are trying so hard to facilitate. And I'm going to flip it back over to Ken, but you know, again, and like I feel for you because you are sort of being like therapist level secure in that you are trying to remain open and nonviolent and accepting and curious. But of course, we can see the attachment injuries when we zoom out, in that this dynamic has been going on for so long, and it was probably very hard for you to walk away at these points. What do you think, Ken?
I completely agree. I mean, it seems to me like for you, and no judgment or shame, it seems like there is a part of you that's probably been a bit curious about Miles every time he comes back. And, this is something I was saying with my colleague Catherine the other day in the No Contact episode we did. Sometimes the pathway out of these dynamics is repeated exposure and repeated disappointment and hurt, because it almost allows you to age emotionally and realize the reality, which is it's not going to get better. Each time he's come back, you've been much more assertive with your boundaries. Granted, like, you haven't cut him off completely, but I'm not about to shame you for that. I often, like, when you've got a boomerang avoidant, you got to be bloody careful with going no contact with these people, because it can be very dysregulating on your nervous system, and going cold turkey can really do tremendous emotional and psychological and even physiological damage to your nervous system straight off the back of all this intermittent reinforcement, right? So in a way, you've had him come back in these short but intense bursts, but I can feel the frustration and like even the less like even though you're noticing like, oh, he's doing all these great things. The two things I want to say, I feel like you're not engaging as much with this drama anymore. And the second thing is, I feel like as you're pulling away even more, he's trying even harder to try and get you back into his codependency with him. And I am calling it codependency because that is exactly what it is. Like, he wants to be able to still maintain a control over the abandonment and well, I should say loss, and control over the intimacy. But this guy has got mega, 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 mega wounds around all of the above. And I feel as though as this letter has progressed, you've become, as I said, increasingly, let's just say, disinterested from the sounds of it, with, maybe even trying, making it work. It sounds like, if anything, you've gotten to a stage where when having sex with them, you're just like, sure, why the hell not? But you're not looking to have much of an emotional connection with him from the sounds of it, because you're trying to just be like, I'm really guarded around you right now. Like, I wouldn't trust you as far as I could throw you. So you're making great progress with this. Anyways, let's round this out. When he couldn't put it off anymore, Miles booked a flight to see me. My anxiety flared immediately. I was worried that our connection would grow deeper and it had been 3 months since he mentioned next steps. I was confused about what we were doing again, and didn't want to have sex unless we were in a relationship. Good. I gave him an ultimatum. Oh yeah, good on you, Anne. Either we're officially together by the time he comes, or we move on. Now, despite the tremendous pressure, he called to talk about it, and initially he was making a joke of things and mocking me, which I knew was him coping with the extreme discomfort. He made excuses like, I haven't thought about how this is going to work long distance. I was infuriated because we talked about seeing each other twice a month, and working from home meant we could stay longer. We haven't lived in the same city since undergrad, so it was an absurd excuse. I was frustrated and ended the conversation. Yeah, good on you. He called again the next night and was far more vulnerable. He said he was afraid because his past relationships ended in so much resentment and pain. He was scared he would unintentionally hurt me and I'd leave. I told him I was tired of feeling like I was putting my needs on the back burner. He said he understood that, acknowledged I'd been very patient, and he didn't want to minimize how important commitment was to me. I told him I didn't buy the I just can't do relationships thing because I saw how doting and expressive he was when he talked to or about his daughter, so I knew he had the capacity. The fact that he uprooted his life to move and stay in her life was a huge commitment. And if he had half that sense of commitment to a woman, he'd be fine. And I said, his mum gets the consistency, transparency, and presence he claims he can't give to women. Yes, but what's the one thing that his wife and also his daughter have in common? They're not able to be vulnerable with him and actually have proper intimacy. So I understand where you're going with that line of logic, but that's not the same relationship he has as with you. Because you represent a psychological threat to him about feeling like he's about to be controlled by someone because of that connection. Anyways, Miles said he agreed and that they get all of him because they're stuck with him. But he doesn't view relationships that way, and maybe that's the problem. Ultimately, he asked me to give him a few more days to think, so I did. On the day he was to have a decision, he texted, I am just going to let us both move on. I hate that it's ending this way, but it is what it is, I guess. I'm going to miss you a lot. My heart dropped through my stomach. He was more invested than he had ever been, and I thought for sure he was going to take the leap. Plus, he was the one who said he wanted to be in a relationship soon. The next day, I sent a closure email detailing how I felt and my suspicions about his mum's impact on the way he showed up with women. I didn't think he'd read it, but blocked his email just in case. The block didn't work because 2 days later I saw his response. He said he agreed with most of what I said, didn't appreciate the ultimatum, but understood why it needed to happen and was going to miss me. This time is so much harder because I love how he showed up. Yeah. I also go back and forth about whether the ultimatum was the right decision, knowing how pressured avoidants feel when no external pressure exists. I feel I gave the ultimatum from a dysregulated state because the thought of increasing intimacy without commitment freaked me out tremendously. I can't help but wonder if I had eased into it, would we have been together soon enough since he really seemed to be increasingly invested in showing up? It's hard knowing he's had long-term relationships but couldn't commit to me, but I was tired of everything being on his timeline, and part of me is proud to have made him shit or get off the pot. This was a 2 year situationship, not including the initial reconnect after undergrad and the 2 years after he was blocked. I'm currently seeing an emotionally focused therapist who is trained in attachment theory, but she still doesn't seem to understand how this dynamic has been so addicting for me. Well, if you're looking for an alternative approach, we do have the amazing Amy who could definitely help a girl out if you wanted it. Just saying, me doing a little bit of shameless marketing for you right there, because it is fucking addicting. But we'll get to that in a minute. Last sentence, I believe. I'm ashamed I stayed so long, but I miss him so much, and I'm agonizing over thoughts that if he was going to get it right with me, knowing he wants marriage soon, is he just going to give it all to the next woman? And I'm going to be really quick because I want to hand this over to Amy and say, I am so sorry that you're going through this. I really feel for you. I understand there's a lot of, as Amy said, investment poured into this. And, I could understand worrying that it's all going to go to the next person. And it could, because it does happen sometimes. We'll talk more about the reality of this in a hot second, but I am so sorry you've gone through this because this just sounds gut-wrenchingly bad for you.
Yeah. Oh God, Anne, like when you said my heart dropped through my stomach, like I felt that for you. I can imagine how that, oh God, I think anyone who has been in a relationship where they have not been the more avoidant one in the dynamic knows this feeling. It is, well, what it is it is actually like your nervous system signaling to you that like a lion is chasing you. That's why your heart drops like that. And it is, you feel like you are literally in danger. And I'm going to skip around because there's so much here, but I'll go to the bottom first. You know, I hear a lot from clients that, sometimes in traditional therapy, they don't feel like they're making the exact movement they want. And you said it so perfectly here that she doesn't really understand why this or how this dynamic can be so addicting. And that's the thing, like it literally is addicting, especially when you have someone, like I said before, who's giving you, of course, the hot and cold, but then like if when the highs are so high and the lows are so low, as they almost always are when you're in a relationship with someone who's avoidant and you also have some sort of attachment insecurity, it is the perfect breeding ground for this addiction to take place. And also, what's happening is like because we are so unsure of when they're coming back or if they'll commit or when are they going to leave, it makes us view them in the relationship as more valuable than they are. And I don't mean his value as a person. Again, I don't believe in calling people valuable or invaluable. I mean value in the relationship and as a partner in terms of like what's healthy and what's not. And when we become so addicted to someone, we stop kind of looking at them as a human being in all of their parts and in all of their sides. We just sort of focus on, I need them to sit and stay with me. Like I need to get them, I need them to commit, and then I can relax because our nervous system sort of gets like dependent upon whether or not we have proximity, emotional or physical to them. And there's even this study with rats that I'll summarize it quickly that just showed they put these rats in like a rat place, a cage, and they gave them consistent food. And there was a lever that gave them consistent food, and then there was a little food bank that was inconsistent. And the rats all picked the lever that gave them inconsistent food. They would just like sit around it and press it all day. And that just showed that inconsistency breeds addiction. So that is, of course, there's so much. I'm trying to summarize it, more briefly, but I don't want you to feel any shame over this and feel like there's anything wrong with you, that this was the dynamic. Um, you know, I was just taking some notes. I want to answer your probably your most important question. Was did you push him sort of out the door by giving him this ultimatum? No, you did not. I really think this would have happened regardless. Why do I think that? Because he has shown such a clear and consistent and predictable pattern. And also, you have modeled stability, patience, nonviolence. Um, you have modeled security for him in that you have shown up consistently. You're not volatile, you're not criticizing him. You have proven yourself through this whole thing to be a very safe place. So I don't think that at that point that you issued the ultimatum, that could have been like the straw that broke the camel's back, or like that could have scared him so much that he needed to back out in that moment. Might it have played a part in like when he left? Maybe, but do I think that he would have left anyway? Yes. And why? Because these these impulses that we have to chase and stay and leave, across the insecure attachment styles, they are not conscious decisions. Some of them are, some of them trickle up to our conscious and we think that we are like in the driver's seat and making these decisions on purpose, or we think like the universe is pushing us to do these things. But what's really happening is that our attachment system, which is like living in the domain of our nervous system and our subconscious mind, is deciding for us. Essentially, our wounded inner child is deciding for us. Like, I think your wounded inner child played a part in deciding that you needed to stay and fight for this relationship. And his wounded inner child was all over the place trying to come back to you, but then believing that he didn't deserve you, but then trying to come back to you, but then scared. And another thing I wanted to point out, his language is very telling. And his language really supports what I was saying, I think, about him having this underlying belief that he does not deserve you, because he says something to the effect of, my mom and my daughter, they get all of me because they're stuck with me. What's
Yeah.
really surprising, right? What's really surprising that most people don't really understand about people with avoidant attachment, especially dismissive avoidant, because this is so hidden, they actually do have an abandonment wound. Like, they actually are afraid of abandonment, but it's so much more subconscious and unconscious. So it doesn't manifest the way like anxious attachment or fearful avoidant attachment manifests. And then he also said that, I think something he said, I'm trying to look for it in the letter, that you would just probably leave him anyway. So I'm just gonna let's just let us go our separate ways. I'm just gonna let us both move on. That to me is very weak language, not in like, oh, you're such like a wimp, not that. It's not strong language. It's not, I don't want this, I don't love you, we're not compatible, I don't want to do this. It's, to me, I'm just gonna let us both move on, is like, I don't know what to do and I'm scared. And so the safest thing for me is just to let go.
Yeah.
Now also, right, before I flip it back to Ken, because I've been rambling, I don't say this and to encourage you to put any more stock or time into this person. I just say this because I don't want you to feel like so many people feel on the backs of these kinds of situations, that like this was a thing, like you were not worthy. And especially since we know you have that wound, or like you did something wrong, or only if he loved you enough, he would commit to you. And you said in the bottom of your question, is he going to give, since he was so close to committing in marriage, is he going to give this to someone else soon? Honestly, I don't see how. I'm such a believer in attachment science, and I don't see how he will meet someone else and settle down and not have his wounds come up raging just as they did with you, unless he finds this like magical secure machine where he walks in and can press a button and come out secure. This stuff is just going to keep happening. And if he does eventually settle down, without doing healing work, it's not going to be this beautiful fairy tale perfect relationship that like you felt you were so close to getting with him. Whew, sorry, that was a lot. I'm going to catch my breath and give it to Ken. What do you think, Ken?
If I had to summarize a character from Game of Thrones, I would say something like, if you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. That's not directed at you, and specifically, it's more about just the situation ship you've been with, miles on. Like, to me, yes to everything you said, Amy. When I said before that he might give marriage connection to the next person, there's a huge thing that I need to make clear on that is that could all be his way of taking a lot of the unprocessed emotional stuff with you and dumping it onto the next person. Unfortunately, that happens. Doesn't mean the connection is going to be edifying, amazing, just as good as yours. No. Also, I love what you said, Amy, too, about how the language he's used with his mum and his daughter, stuck. That sounds like obligation to me. This is a guy who gets very codependent around matters of obligation. He probably feels guilty if he wasn't to be around them. You, on the other hand, don't come with any obligations as of such. You're not someone who's got mental health related challenges that he can easily swoop in to help you out with. Although there was one thing that actually Amy mentioned way back when that I forgot to chime in on too, which was that whole situation of him trying to get you to confront your dad about the stuff that he'd done. and to try and reconcile that relationship. To me, that speaks to a bit of a savior thing inside of him. It makes me think that he has this part of him which desires to, like, one of his ways of connecting with people is to try and solve their problems or to try and fix an issue. And I think had that been an ongoing issue, you would have probably seen more of that from him in other ways. Maybe you did, but I definitely feel like there's definitely a bit of a white knight in him, so to speak, which is not really constructive for any relationship. I think that also another thing to think of is why it's so hard knowing he's had long-term relationships but couldn't commit to you. So I said this on the previous episode that in society, we have this tendency to pedestal people who've been in relationships. We think they have all the answers. Especially if they were married and had kids, like it's almost like, oh my God, you've done it all. You must know what you're talking about. Couldn't be further from the truth. Just like job experience, relationship experience does not equal relationship capabilities. And for him, he honestly could be just someone who is really good at being dysfunctional in relationships, and just because he's had multiple partners doesn't mean he knows how to do intimacy. The fact that he's kept coming back, boomeranging harder and faster than some other people I've, read about, makes me think he obviously has cared about you and there's a lot of emotion here, but you've also gotten deeper with him than he probably has with previous partners. And his previous partners have probably been, hurt by his behavior as well too, where they've just been like, I've had enough, I'm getting out of here. The way he also closed this relationship by deciding to end it and to take the bull by the horns makes me think he did that out of fear. He did that out of fear because he couldn't handle loss. I wouldn't be surprised if he was actually in his freeze response when that happened. I wouldn't be surprised if he came at that from a place of hopelessness and wanting to just avoid the pain of loss. But I wouldn't be surprised if this guy, and I know this is going to be hard to hear, but I wouldn't be surprised if a potential coping mechanism for him is he jumps back into a new relationship, maybe gets back with the friends with benefits who he shares a daughter with, just to feel better about himself too, because it really sounds to me like his self-worth is bottom rung of hell. Like it really doesn't sound like he's doing particularly well for himself internally. And ultimately, on one hand, I kind of pity him because it really sounds like he's so like there's so much bratty energy in there that hasn't been like that's really, I think, speaking to so much emotional neglect this man has suffered. However, he's not the person who's writing into me. You are. So honestly, I feel really sorry for you. You've tried everything to try and make this work to avoid loss. As Amy mentioned and reminded us too, you've obviously talked about how it would be terrible to feel like you've been not chosen for someone else. And he's essentially doing that. Like he's known your history, yet he's discarded you time and time again. And I am using the word discard because he's had a history of doing this now. So it's not just a unconscious, pushed you away sort of thing. There's obviously a bit of intention here with a lot of this stuff. So I have to say, I feel really sorry for you. Last thing I'll say before I round out my piece for the day and go ahead and make lunch is to say, I really respect the fact that, look, your EFT therapist might be doing, amazing work with you, not to discount them. I am here to let you know, though, that usually the people who really get it are unfortunately the people who've been through it. And they don't teach this sort of stuff in psychology or therapy school. This is a trauma bond. And a trauma bond, as Amy said, is bloody addictive. And particularly with fearful avoidance, I've got to be honest, it's always going to be harder than the dismissive avoidance who one and done you. Yeah, some dismissives can boomerang, but they're the minority in my experience. But it is one of those things where you've just been dosed up on so much intense emotional cocktails. And I'm sorry that it got so good before it ended so badly like this, because it's not, I can imagine you just feeling like, what, was that ultimatum my fault and everything? I agree with Amy. This ultimatum, if I'm completely honest, wasn't really going to change anything. I think the outcome was entirely inevitable because the closer you got, the more you wanted to push for a relationship, he backed the hell away. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Ken. And, I just want to go back to your question again. You say, Anne, I'm ashamed I stayed so long, but I miss him so much, and I'm agonizing over thoughts that if he was just so close to getting it right with me. So, I just want to address this because I really don't want you to carry this shame. Like this, please douse yourself in self-compassion. Um, I know that sometimes we think if we're just hard on ourselves and if we just say like, hey, you should have known better and how could you do this? And like, oh my God, you're so pathetic. That will not sort of like set us straight. That won't help us. What you need right now so much is so much self-compassion. And I'm so glad that you're getting support from a therapist. And also, if it's not working though, I hope that you can find more support and or talk to her and maybe, she can adjust her approach. But I really hope that you can really focus on self-compassion when you're going throughout your day and you're feeling these negative thoughts inside and feeling this shame. I just want you to sort of put your hand on your chest and remember that you were doing this like from a place of love and from a place of wounding. Like you there is a reason that you felt called to stay and you're exploring that. You were doing the best you could with the tools you had at the time. This stuff is like we were saying before, when we have attachment, when there are attachment wounds at play, relationships are much harder. Our compass is in need of recalibration. And sometimes we can't see the red flags for what they are. And sometimes we stay longer because we have these wounds and needs and they're telling us what's safe and what's not, and the signals are totally getting mixed. And that part of attachment healing is getting your compass calibrated again and understanding what's healthy, what's not. And our nervous system is all over the place when we're in these. So please just have so much self-compassion. Um, you know, Also, the thing is here, I'll try to make this a little more concise. Situations, I help so many people. I've had so many clients come to me after breakups. And I have to tell you, breakups of situationships are so much more painful a lot of the time than like divorces of 10 or 20-year marriages. I have seen it time and time again. Ken is shaking his head. Yes, because I'm sure he's seen it too.
Yep.
Um, and there's a reason, and I'll try to, make this concise, but think about it. When we're in a situationship, we are in a situationship by nature basically means one person is running from a relationship and one person wants the relationship. That means that the person who wants it is likely very, very anxious and in a state of like holding on to this slippery bar of soap. And the second you hold on a little tighter, it goes poof, popping out of your hands. Or like holding on to sand. That's like what being in a situationship is like if you're not the more avoidant person. And so think about it. If you're over 2 years in this state of almost getting what you want most, almost having the person, whole time unsure if you're ever going to speak to them again, when they ghost, when they come back, you are your mind and your body have been sort of put in this place where they are like waiting for danger to occur or waiting to be saved. That's what it feels like in our nervous system because again, we're not processing these things only in our conscious mind. And so what is happening here also when we're in a situationship with someone who won't commit, why are we staying there? Well, because we have seen good things in them. We have seen moments of commitment, moments of stability, moments of love. And so we stay because we say, oh, look, this person's capable of this. If I just stay and if I become really secure, if I just become perfect or figure out what it is that they need me to be, I will get that thing that I've gotten a taste of more consistently. And the longer we stay there, the more we yearn for that. And then in the meantime, to get those needs met that we kind of had a little taste of, we start creating this relationship with this dream version of this person in our head. And we create this movie and this dream world and this dream future in which we're going to live with this person and they're finally going to be amazing and they're going to commit. And we become very attached to that dream version, this dream life with them. And this dream potential perfect version of them that we kind of got a little scratchy outline of, but that we have filled in this really rich picture because we want this, we sort of confuse that with the person in real life. And so, Anne, before we wrap this up, because I know this is getting really long, I'm just going to give you a quick exercise to do. I want you to really just sit down and think, what part of you is missing him as he was when he showed up for you, and not the inconsistent parts, the overall picture, the how he consistently was with his inconsistent pattern. How much of you is missing that, and how much of you is agonizing and missing the dream version of his potential that you probably were painting and got, very addicted to? And by the way, this is not a you thing. This happens to all of us when we're in these positions. Whew. So I hope that makes sense. And again, I'm so, so sorry that you've been through this because I can feel the pain. I can feel the heaviness. And these situations just really are, they are so brutal. So we really wish you so much healing, Anne.
I only echo that times 1,000. Like, I mean, it's truly hideous to go through an experience like this. I've had multiple situationships that have ended pretty devastatingly for me. And this kind of behavior, as Amy said, I love the way you were describing it, Amy. It's like you get sold on the drug of hope that it's all gonna, get better because you see these little signs of improvement. I hate to say it, but I think going through these experiences is the real learning behind this. You can hear me talk about the theory of this. You can hear me say there's no hope, but it's almost like you almost have to experience no hope for yourself to really understand why there is no hope in these sort of situations. Provided they aren't, like, if they're working on themselves, that's a different story. But we also have to learn, that's the last thing I'll say, we have to make judgment as to whether or not a person has the capability to work on themselves in the moment with us. Too often we're seeing signs, oh, well, they're in therapy. I'm sorry, how much therapy have they actually done? Because if you think them going to the first round of tennis lessons is the same as being able to commit to tennis lessons, it's not. It's night and day. And we all need, not just you, Anne, we all need to make very discerning choices and be like, I'm sorry, but if you're not actually on like a full course diet of wanting to work on this attachment style of yours, you're actually a danger to me as much as a danger to yourself. And I say that for the severe end of all insecure attachment styles, not just Miles. Anyways, gonna round out here. And thank you for what was a fabulous letter to read out with Amy and myself. And thank you also for requesting Amy to join. It's actually the first time we've had someone be like, we want Amy to participate in this. Not that she's unpopular, but it's just that it's not, this is the first time we've had someone be like, and I want Amy to also be part of this experience. So that was very cute. So thank you very much for that. Amy, is there anything you want to say as we round out?
Yes, no, yes, thank you, Anne. I'm so honored that you wanted, me to be on this letter. And I hope that we did it justice, and I hope that you feel some bit of healing from this. So yes, feel free to message me on Instagram or something if you have another follow-up question or a comment, or if we missed something. Although we have been talking for 2 hours, so I don't know if we could have missed anything, but always my pleasure to be here with Ken and with all of you. And yes, I hope that your heart is feeling better.
Just to round out here, guys, thank you for listening. If you found this letter reading helpful, please leave us a review because it does help obviously guide us in learning if this is obviously of value. Seems like it is because we keep getting letters and I love it. And the reviews seem to be doing well. So hooray. Other than that, though, we'll catch you guys around next week for more letter readings. And thank you as always for trusting us to validate your experiences and share our insights.